Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It's Friday, January 10th. Derek Van Riper, Eno Saris here with you on this episode. We catch you up on some baseball news from the week. We have Justin Verlander starting another chapter, perhaps the final chapter of his big league career after signing in San Francisco. We had movement on the Gavin Lux front. We'll talk about his fit after a trade to Cincinnati. Brent Rooker, friend of the program, got a contract extension with the A's. So congrats to Brent. We'll talk about the implications of that and his long-term outlook on the heels of a 5-year deal with the Athletics. Got a few other moves we'll get to and a couple more mailbag questions, including one that suggests that Blake Snell might be the best pitcher of this decade so far. So tons of ground to cover on this Friday. And be sure to join our Discord with the link in the show description if you haven't done that already. It's a great place to hash out some of the arguments that arise over the course of our episodes. Let's begin with the Giants. This came up a little bit on our episode on Thursday with Trevor. Justin Verlander maybe having to make some more adjustments. The late stage adjustments, has signed a 1-year deal with the Giants. From a fantasy perspective, it's one of the safer places he could have signed because you can pretty easily look at those home starts and say, hey, in deeper leagues, I want that. Part of the appeal here, too, is that Verlander's stuff still looked good in the model. And as you started to outline on our Thursday episode, a few adjustments could actually go a long way. He might be able to rebound, not all the way back to the 2023 levels in terms of ratios, but at least like 70 to 80% of that might be possible. Like I actually have a little bit of optimism based on where he went and maybe a floor that isn't absurdly low just because of the home park.
Yeah, I could see him, putting up a sort of like a 3.5, 3.6 ERA at home. And maybe striking out 21, 22% of the guys he sees. Because, with the revision of the model, one thing that stuck out was the fastball is no longer rated as a plus fastball. And it used to be. If you look at Fangraphs, you're saying, whoa, 115 on the fastball. That seems wrong. And it is, I think. It's in the revision, it's down to like a 90. And that seems right because the velo's down, the movement's down. But he's still using it the way that he used to. So the problem is that he's throwing it exclusively high in the zone. If you look at the slider, which was rated positively in the old model and in the new model that pitching bot hates, I'm going to defend Verlander's slider because it's an 87 mile an hour gyro slider. And we have a general rule that 85 plus mile an hour sliders are good. You don't even have to look at the movement too hard to think that this should be a good slider. So what's happened on the slider is they're not chasing outside the zone anymore. And I think that's because everyone's like, oh, I've got this tasty high fastball. It's 93 miles an hour. It's not what it used to be. He keeps throwing it up there. I'm going to just look high and spit on everything low. And my solution to that is to throw some low four seam, or maybe develop a sinker. Even if it's not a great sinker, throw a sinker low against righties to make them on or low in the zone, to get some called strikes, to do something different. And, I was talking to a baseball executive about this idea recently, and they brought up a saying that they'd heard before, which is, as a coach, you want to be the solution, not the problem. And so what that means is the most difficult thing for a coach, especially with a sort of a veteran like this, is you suggest something, they try it, they get their beans knocked in, and you're the problem, not the solution. But what I also would venture to say is Verlander's coming off of one of the worst seasons of his life. He was just left off the playoff roster, by the Astros. He is probably more ready to listen to ideas than he has been in a while.
And maybe is hatching a few of his own over the course of the offseason, too. I mean, a guy that's going to be in the Hall of Fame, whenever he decides to hang it up, waits a few years, he's going to get in. Like, there's no doubt about that. Has nothing left to prove. He's won World Series before. Like, it's not, there's no box left to tick. So for him to come back out.
Competitiveness.
If he's going to come back, I assume there will be adjustments, be that things he wants to do on his own, things that the Giants suggest to him, wherever those ideas come from. It'd be surprising to me if he tried to do the exact same stuff that just didn't work well in 2020.
That's right. And then also, he just watched Hunter Brown add a sinker and just become one of the best pitchers in the big leagues. So, and Hunter Brown developed his whole game off of Justin Verlander. So, there is some similarities. I'm sure that Verlander's heard before about the similarities between him and Hunter Brown.
Probably, yeah. Someone's probably mentioned that to him at some point.
So I think that the stars are aligned for this to be a good signing. What were the other $15 million signings? I like it a little bit better than the Matt Boyd signing. I think they had to go to 2 years to get Matt Boyd.
Alex Cobb.
I think I like it better. I love Alex Cobb as a person, but I think I like it better than the Alex Cobb signing. There's at least theoretically more strikeouts in there, supposedly for Verlander. And also, health wise, I don't know. Verlander's been healthier over his career. Cobb has had every single surgery known to man.
All of them. It's absurd. We're not actually exaggerating. He's had all the surgeries.
Yeah, so I feel like at some point it's just going to go for him. Who were some other $15 million signings that, Giolito almost counts because he was the year before, one of those we'll give you $15 million in your healthy year. I think and just generally for who I would draft this year. I'm taking Verlander over Boyd. I'm taking Verlander over Cobb. I'm taking Verlander. Am I taking Verlander over Giolito? I think so. That might need a little more interrogation. But I'm looking at my ranks right now, and I've got Giolito projected for a 4.29 ERA. And Verlander's regular projections are for about that, and his stuff-based projections are for 4.17. I do have Giolito higher in my working ranks, but I wouldn't be surprised if they coalesce there a little bit. And as a signing, also Giolito's in that tough park.
Yeah, I think there's more questions because of the timetable around the injury for Lucas Giolito, but they are in the same bucket by ADP and by salary, even though Giolito signed last year. You'd be looking at Verlander from an ADP perspective against...
Oh, I guess I like Buehler better.
Buehler from a contract perspective is similar to, got more from the Red Sox, but he's going about 100 picks earlier right now. That'll change now that we know where Verlander's pitching. I think now that we know Verlander is coming back and where he's pitching, he'll creep up a little bit.
Verlander versus Morton.
I'd rather have Verlander than Morton. I just think there are a few more ways for him to get closer to his previous late career levels than Morton. Morton, I just don't see as many paths for it. There's so much relying on the curveball, and the other stuff is just deteriorated too much.
Yeah. Verlander has the slider still, and I think he also still has the changeup and the curve. So, if he could even just do the thing where he maybe he throws a cutter instead of a sinker, and he just really throttles the four seam and barely throws it. How
about Verlander versus Edward Cabrera?
Oh, why? Why? I didn't even bring him up. Edward Cabrera is also one of our oh my God, a 3.84 projected ERA. 96 innings last year for Cabrera and 90 for Verlander. They're actually very, very close in my rankings. I have Edward Cabrera ahead.
Okay. I thought you might, but I wanted to be sure. I didn't want to make any assumptions because that doesn't seem fair. I do have a question for you about the quality of the Giants pitching staffs. You add Verlander in some order. It's Webb, Verlander, and Ray. Maybe you put Ray in the number 2 spot. I probably would at this stage of their respective careers, but sometimes it's just about schedule and respect and not about who the actual second best starter is. Those 3 guys at the top with Kyle Harrison and then Hayden Birdsong and Jordan Hicks kind of in the bottom half of the rotation. Keaton Winn's hurt right now. I don't think they're going to go 6-man, so someone will lose if everyone's healthy. So out of Harrison, Birdsong, and Hicks, who do you think is most likely to begin the year without a rotation spot?
Well, the easiest way to do this is look at who has options, and Birdsong still has options. So if they're all healthy, I could see that happening. But I do want to throw out the idea that Hicks may push Walker for closer. There's going to be some discussion in the spring of, will Hicks be able to go further into the season with good stuff? I mean, I think the Hicks as a starter experiment worked for the first couple of months. It was pretty good.
Yeah, it looked good for April and May at least. I mean, the first half ERA was a 3.79, but yeah, it was probably around June when it started to fall apart.
And it was velo tied. And I think it was just like, oh, I can't keep this up. So the question this spring will be, well, now that you've done that, can you keep it up for longer this year? Or is that just going to happen again this year? And if that's going to happen again this year, do we rather just have you as a reliever?
Yeah.
Because they do have some interesting depth, and Lana Roop is kind of interesting too. And Mason Black has some aspects that are interesting. So, that's not the worst collection of guys to have as depth. But I think the most likely outcome is Hicks is the 5th starter and Birdsong is the 6th starter and is in the minors.
And if it doesn't go well for Hicks as a starter, yeah, that possibility of shifting into a high leverage relief role, it's out there because we know things maybe have changed a bit with how this organization feels about Camilo Doval. Maybe he's not as much of a lock to get back into the closer role as we would have thought this time a year ago if we'd forecasted job loss in 2024. Ryan Walker was really good. We'll get to him probably in more detail in the closer episode. But yeah, like what's she's a sub-2 ERA, sub-1 whip, 99 Ks last year in 80 innings. It was a big workload, but he was phenomenal.
Yeah, he's like a baby Jake Arrieta in the bullpen, And I think he's every bit as good as you might have thought if Arrieta had been in the bullpen, how good he'd be. Ryan Walker's projection is for a 3.11 ERA using Jordan Rosenblum's stuff-driven projections, which I think will be on Fangraphs sometime soon. It's not, it's like the 31st best ERA projection, and there are starters ahead of him. So it's not the very best, but around him are Logan Gilbert, Jeff Hoffman, Ben Joyce. He's ahead of Brian Abreu, Jason Adam, Yimi Garcia. So he's a good reliever. I think he's fairly safe. I don't mind him as a second closer. I don't think he's like a top tier closer. And even among second tier closers, I kind of like Ben Joyce as being like really legitimately safe because I don't think that team has other options.
Maybe not.
And
yeah.
I do think the Giants have some other options. And then Jason Adam is not even a closer. So, who would he go up against in ADP?
Walker is inside the top 100 in ADP over the last 10 days at the NFBC. The closers that are closest to him are a couple guys that go earlier. Joan Duran and Robert Suarez go just inside the top 80. Walker goes about a round later.
Duran so much to both of the other two. I think Suarez has a competitor in that bullpen and has shown some warts. I think he's like Walker. And who's behind them?
Coming from the other direction, Lucas Erceg goes a bit later than Walker. I'm surprised there's that much of a gap between them. It's about 15 picks right now. I could see that gap shrinking.
I prefer Erceg and Duran. So I prefer, hitting earlier with Duran or later with Erceg. So as much as I like Walker and Suarez, I do think that they have some competition in their bullpens and they're, what they do is not unassailable. Like Ryan Walker throws a sinker. There aren't that many sinker first closers because of the platoon advantage.
Does he throw it hard enough to count it as a power sinker though?
Yes.
Yeah. So I could live with it. I think it's a profile that can work.
But it's not like an undoubted yes. I said yes pretty quickly, but it's not an undoubted yes. I mean, It's 95.6 is, the average reliever now is over 94. Suarez at least throws a sinker at like 97.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I like Ryan Walker. I don't like how aggressively he's being drafted right now.
That's what I'm saying.
That's kind of where I'm doing something else.
Going after Urseg or around Urseg or, a couple of rounds later, I would take it. You also have to remember that the closer ADP right now is inflated by the fact that we're doing draft and holds right now. And in draft and holds, you have no ability to go to the wire. And so people are drafting their closers earlier. Now, whether or not that's a good strategy or not, I tend to think it's not. I'm going to get a good closer, and then I'm going to get some options later, and I'm going to hope to be middle of the pack in saves and draft and hold, because I do not want to spend a bunch of early round picks on players that have higher bust rates than position players.
Yeah, I think we'll try to get lucky with some later dart throws that we'll talk about a bit on the reliever preview, position
especially
preview
since
starting
there's so
next week.
many. We were talking about this in the group chat. Like, there's so many situations that are unsettled, and there's so many good relievers still out there. Tanner Scott hasn't even signed. Kenley Jansen hasn't signed.
Jeff Hoffman, all very good options that could close for any of the teams that need help in the bullpen right now.
Yeah.
So a lot to be determined there as well. Maybe that's driving up some of those second tier options that have jobs right now too, because there's fewer established options to choose from at this point in time. The Dodgers did it. They traded Gavin Lux. We've speculated on this for years. It finally happened.
They could have traded him for Lindor, I feel like. Then they said they wouldn't. Was that what there was like we will not trade Gavin Lux for a long time. And then they were like, oh, for a couple draft picks? Sure.
I wonder if we could find enough actual legit rumors for Gavin Lux to make a full-on feature about it. Like, how many players were almost traded for Gavin Lux, but the Dodgers didn't want to give up Lux, right? It's really hard to confirm that kind of stuff, but nevertheless, it did happen. I like this because at least he landed in another great park for power. And I think if you have questions about Gavin Lux and what he's going to be as a player, it's kind of like, well, how much power is there? He made some changes in the second half last season, was swinging the bat harder. I see like this kind of odd baseline of league average bat that doesn't do anything exceptionally well that we care about for fantasy. And coming off the torn ACL in particular, maybe there's just some reluctance to run. I think he's even talked about not fully trusting his leg at the beginning of last year. So there's always the possibility that he runs a little bit more than he did in year 2 off of the surgery as opposed to year 1. Maybe you get something
with
there.
Free agency approaching, the Reds tend to run a fair amount.
Right. Yeah. Tito's Reds are probably going to run a little bit. So I'll leave my mind open to the possibility that the 5 bags in 2024 could turn into 10 or 12. If it turns into more than that, great. But I wouldn't go over the top expecting a lot. But we look at things like his barrel rate, 6% last year, 5.6% for his career.
Average is like 4.5, 5. Then that's average. Yeah. That's average across all players. If you're talking about players with power, your average is more like 7, 8.
Yeah. Career 99 WRC plus, like right around league average, right? A 22% K rate for his career, 22% last year.
League average.
It's okay to be an average player is a good outcome long term for your life. But when you were a top 3 overall prospect for people, that's when the disappointment comes in. So I will present this to you as a simple question. Going into Cincinnati and into that ballpark, what is Gavin Lux's ceiling now that we've seen a few seasons of him in the big leagues? I mean, basically 3 years worth of semi-regular or near regular duty and then a couple seasons prior to that. So we're looking at almost 1,500 career plate appearances. I feel like we have an okay handle on what this guy can reasonably do. Does the park change a lot for you as far as what you expect from him in 2025?
A little bit, because I ran batted ball comps for Gavin Lux, and I went through and I just said, who's within sort of 1.5 miles of max EV above and below, who's within, sort of 4% of hard hit above and below, who's within the same K percentages. And I've got a pretty good comp in Cincinnati, Spencer Steer.
Okay.
It's not who you'd think of first, I don't think. But in terms of, and I didn't do it based on walk rate or speed or whatever, but, Spencer Steer has a little more speed than you might expect for a first baseman outfielder. They have similar walk rates, similar strikeout rates, similar OBPs, similar slugging percentages, similar WRC pluses, similar hard hit. I mean, they are similar down. Like Gavin Lux has even hit a ball a little bit harder than Steer, but Steer has barreled a little bit more. So they are really close. And so I think, the ceiling for Gavin Lux this next year is sort of like a 2010 season, like a 250 2010 season.
Which is not bad.
It's not bad. Now, the real question is, will he get the chance to get the volume?
Mm-hmm.
But if he is hitting like that, I do see a way. I see 2 or 3 pathways forward for Lux to be the everyday starter at second. 1, Matt McLain is the center fielder. There's already talk of this.
Yes. So before you go to the next one, if Matt McLain's the center fielder, is TJ Friedl playing in a corner against righties and then they're doing something else against lefties?
Yes, I think Friedl joins the Fraley Benson, backup platoon situation.
But he's probably atop that for one spot right now. Okay, so you're on the Matt McLain plays center. That's part of it. Okay,
and
how else
there's already been discussion of this. The other one is Noelvi Marte is not good.
That's a possibility.
I mean, we don't know for sure. I mean, with a 15% whiff rate in AAA and the major leagues last year, I think a 24% projected strikeout rate for Noelvi Marte is actually maybe too nice. Right? If he comes out swinging and missing 15% of the time again, like he did last year, he's going to strike out closer to 28, 30%. If he's striking out 28, 30%, his OBP is going to be 280. If he has OBP of 280 and a batting average of 220 and his defense isn't great, he might go back to the minors.
It's in the range of outcomes again. He's still so young. And I have not moved off my previous Noelvi Marte stance of the PED suspension that cost him most of last season, which is, yes, his fault. And even I think he was maybe a little dinged up too. But regardless, like it was such a miserable small sample. Projections are going to ding him pretty good. And I'm trying to look more at the player he was pre-2024 when forecasting him than like getting too caught up in a disaster season. I'm still surprised he was running last year. He was 9 for 12 as a base stealer over 66 games. Like I continue to see more in that category than I expected based on scouting grades. And maybe as he ages, it'll quickly fade. But that still looks like a 20 steal sort of player to me with everyday playing time. You're right about the swing and miss. If the swing and miss is still there.
I'm not saying Noelvi Marte is bad, but
it's a possibility that when everyone says, "Oh, the Reds have too many,"
82 WRC plus and 0.4 WAR in a third of a season, so he's not projected very well.
Well, and the way it's set up right now, I mean, Jake Fraley would be part of the right field DH mix. Like RotoWire has him atop the depth chart at DH. He's going to play against righties. Fraley's injury history also factors in, just as far as being a guy that they rely on who may not be available all season long. So that could open up some playing time too.
Like, there's other players. Will Benson may not be good.
Right.
He's 26. He's going to get another shot. He's projected to be a round league average of the bat for a corner outfielder. That might not be enough. Heimer Candelario is 31 and they do have to pay him in 26. So I doubt this happens, but if he starts out the season with like a 70 WRC plus and can't play third, is a DFA impossible?
Not impossible. It doesn't seem like something they would do
most likely
this year, something they would do early next year in the final year.
Encarnacion Strand is 25. He hasn't established himself, as a regular and wasn't that great last year. If he doesn't start off really well, he has options and can go back down. So
he could, and I would also
soft spots on this, and I'm tempted to think Lux is Like, I'm tempted to circle Lux as a bit of a sleeper.
A little bit of a sleeper. Okay. Round kind of like the Campusano talk from a couple of days ago. About the fourth or fifth time we've thought of him as an undervalued player or a sleeper, but the projection you threw out there is not unreasonable. The 250, 20 homers, 10 steal type
18,
player.
Maybe 18-8, but like.
But in that park, in that lineup, if some of those young guys come through, which I'd be surprised if they were all bad. I'd be surprised if CES was bad and Noel V. Marte was bad and Matt McLean took a big step down from what he did in his debut season. And all three of those things happened, that'd be pretty weird.
And none of the outfielders like step forward because that's part of the process too.
Right.
Like if Friedel's just great, like, he's center fielder.
I would also put CES in the lost season bucket for 2024, where it's just like
injury based.
What did we learn about him? Like pretty much nothing. He tried to play through an injury and missed most of the season after realizing he couldn't. Right. So if you were excited about him going into last season, you should still be at least somewhat excited about how things are lining up for him as we look at this season.
For Lux, though, there's the kind of the opposite thing, which is that he started swinging the bat faster, and that has something to do with the added power in the second half last year. So if he can maintain swinging the bat faster for a full season, there may be a level of power we haven't really seen yet, which you kind of would have to get to 20. But the underlying numbers are not great, but there are other players like Spencer Steer who have hit 20 homers with the same underlying numbers.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good point. It's an interesting comp for sure. I think of all the guys you had comp, they were all righties. Lux was a lefty. So yeah, that playing time leak against same-handed pitching is probably the biggest threat. It'd be playing because he's not good enough to play against lefties, not getting squeezed by everyone else, right? It's kind of his own. Maybe they give him a month and see what it looks like. And if they don't like what they see, then it's big side platoon. So I do think that's the nagging thing that works against him, but probably a little undervalued right now with the move into Cincinnati. We'll see if that holds.
That is generally a thing to think about in weekly leagues. Is you kind of prefer, if you've got two iffy players in a depth chart like this, you almost sometimes prefer the righty because they might play all the time.
The righty that struggles against righties, the Alec Boehm problem, I think it has been over the years, where it's like he destroys lefties and kind of just tries to hold his own against righties.
Yeah, but it's also just not. I mean, yeah, it can be. I mean, it's more precarious with the righty because if they
lose their share,
they're done.
They're cooked.
Yeah, but it's more likely to happen with a lefty. You know what I mean? To leak plate appearances like that.
No, it's good times. I thought the Dodgers did pretty well in the deal, getting a comp A pick, I think, back along with a prospect. So.
And the prospect was just taken, Mike Sirota,
I think it was.
Sirota. He doesn't even have a Fangraphs page because he didn't play, but he was just taken in this last draft in like the third round, I think. So it's basically like getting a third rounder and a second rounder, which is not bad.
Not bad at all. Moving on to some other news you should know. Brent Rooker gets a 5-year, $60 million extension. Again, congrats to Brent. It's nice to see that. And the A's are still trying to work their way up in salary to avoid a grievance with the Players Association. This helps. I don't think it completely gets them to the threshold they need to reach, but hey, every little bit will help for a team trying to increase payroll. Rooker mentioned in the interview we had with him in December, he is coming off of forearm surgery, not too far behind his usual offseason pace, so it doesn't seem like something that's going to really impact him come spring training and eventually on opening day. What kind of follow-up to last year's step forward are you expecting? You have some comps for Rooker too?
Yeah, I went through the comps and I didn't want to list them all because his comps are actually, there's a fair amount of them because he is a guy who hits the ball hard and strikes out, and there's more and more of those in the game. But if you want to know who makes up the comps for him, it's Teoscar Hernandez, JD Martinez, Cal Raleigh, Austin Riley, Marcell Ozuna, Rafael Devers, Christian Walker. It makes sense, right? These are guys who hit the snot out of the ball and sometimes miss it, but it is a group that's good. And so I wanted to kind of summarize the comps for y'all. And the one thing I wanted to point out was, the walk percentage, the K percentage, they're all similar. Hard hit, near 50%, bail rate near 15-16%, max EV over 113. All that's good and gravy. And he's going to slug. But look at the BABIP. BABIP for Brent Rooker last year was a 362 batting average on ball play, and projected he has a 304 because that's the league average plus a little bit of juice for hitting the ball hard, right? But his comps had a BABIP last year of a 317, and that's potentially 10 points of batting average that you would just add to his projection if you believe that he can do a 317. And what did he do in 2023? A 317. So you give him a 317 BABIP, and his projection turns to a 253, which I think is kind of important because I looked at good batting averages in 15 teamers last year, and your good batting average on a team level is like a 258 in a 15 team. To get a guy that hits 30 plus homers and to get him from 243 to 253 is going to be important for your lineup. That would make him closer to an average guy. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And not a guy who's going to pull your batting average down. His comps, their batting average was 258. I'm willing to give him that, which means he's not going to hurt your batting average as much as other people in your draft might think he will.
Yeah, I get the sense that as people roll out their busts or their avoid columns, Rooker is going to pop up in some of them because it almost seems like there's nowhere to go but down. Like what more
and
could
that's
he
true.
do?
He's 30. He had a 362 BABIP. He had 293. Like these are things that will go down. But sometimes I think people overreact to that stuff.
Yeah, and the underlying numbers have always been good. He's got a career 15.3% barrel rate. That's just who he is. And I think you're right. The 317 BABIP he ran in 2023 is a pretty good proof that it'll come down, but it's probably not crashing. The fact that he runs a little bit, a lot of these mashers, these lower average mashers that are power first offer very little in that category. 11 for 14 is a base stealer, so maybe that continues. And then there's also the home park, the situation in Sacramento, playing there versus in the Coliseum. We're assuming at least a slight uptick overall with what happens on balls in play across the board. So that kind of helps keep things at a high level for Rooker too.
And, the left field situation with Seth Brown and Miguel Andujar is such that they've already talked about Brent Rooker playing in the outfield. And I think that might be at some point to open up some time for Nick Kurtz, who is one of their best prospects, plays first base, DH. Soderstrom's there. But Kurtz last year, in Double-A as a 21-year-old, walked 13% of the time, struck out 20% of the time, and he throwed more power in A-ball. If he goes into Double-A, which he will, and just rips it up, he may make a case for coming to the big leagues. And if that happens, that pushes more Rooker in the outfield. I do think that by the end of the season, I don't know exactly when, Rooker is going to have outfield eligibility.
Yeah, it could take just a couple of months for him to get the 5 games that most leagues require in season. The prospects TLDR from Fangraphs on Nick Kurtz. This probably is an Eric Longenhagen special. Kurtz is a shot to be the best hitter from the 2024 draft class and one of the best 10 to 15 first basemen in baseball. Like that's nice. That's pretty. You don't see a lot of first base prospects that come in with that as their takeaway, their kind of initial scouting report.
Yeah, so, usually you don't do that well in rankings because because a lot of these prospect rankings are for real life value, and they focus a lot on the fact that first basemen don't have defensive value, and they have this bigger sort of leap to make to make it to the big leagues because they have to be such a great hitter to make it work.
Got a few other flyby news items to get to here. I'll throw them out there. Eno can offer a quick reaction. Drew Rasmussen gets an extension with the Rays. Yeah, I mean, it's
a little surprising given the fact that he's coming off like, I don't know how to classify each of the elbow surgeries because he had 2 in college, but one might have been a revision. But you could also not be completely wrong in saying that he's had his 3rd Tommy John.
Right. I mean, it's been just a miserable road of arm injuries for Drew Rasmussen, and just to see him come out of it on the other side and still be a big leaguer in and of itself is a good story.
Yeah, and I love talking to him, and he's so competitive and so good about his craft, but there could be, especially if they trade Pete Fairbanks, one of the outcomes could be Rasmussen as closer. What they're paying him won't be a problem for them either way.
Right.
It's only a 2
years.
Extension.
Yeah. 2 for 8.5. But again, with all the injuries he's been through, just to get that it's a testament to how hard he's worked to get back.
Yeah, and I like picking him. I without knowing what his average draft position is, because I think that he will be valuable and really good, and he'll pitch some innings this year. Now, it does matter where you pick him, because are we sure he's in the starting 5? I like him as a pitcher better than Zach Littell, but Littell has got more innings. He's a bit more of a quote unquote starting pitcher in terms of arsenal and stuff. Maybe, I don't know, in terms of how deep he can go into games and stuff like that. So Rasmussen may be a 3-inning guy to start until somebody gets hurt, and then he slides in, or maybe Shane McClanahan doesn't start the season in the rotation.
Yeah, McClanahan. The last comments, I forget if we brought this up on the show. Eric Neander back in December said he expects McClanahan to throw 150-ish innings in 2025. So that's not much of a delay. If they even delay him, they could just use off days and all-star break and basic schedule tweaks to keep him there, and then occasionally get him out of the game a little early or skip the start, right? Like, I don't think that's a let's just hold him back for a month sort of situation for McClanahan. I think that's a relatively
But it could
normal.
Be a 6-man rotation.
That's a possibility. I mean, they're kind of built for it with some of the injuries they've dealt with, and they have enough depth
to pull it off. If Joe Boyle makes the opening day roster, they've got a guy who's in between starting and relieving that can help them kind of make it through the iffy days if they get there. So I don't know. I like Rasmussen. I'm just not exactly sure about the number of innings. Obviously, the health risk is through the roof, and I want to know a little bit more about their role. You will learn something in spring training just by how they use them in spring training, because the starters in their first start, they get like 1 inning. Their second start, they get like 2 or 3, and there's a very obvious progression. So if he's not following the starter's progression, you can already start to follow along and make some assumptions.
Yeah, and I think something you said in passing before is there's a good chance Rasmussen has a useful role. And if Pete Fairbanks gets traded the next month, that also leaves that door open for Rasmussen to switch roles and possibly get saves. It's also an option. Speaking of saves, is Chris Martin an option for saves in Texas? I mean, we're looking at Robert Garcia. I was just warming up to Garcia. I was excited about Garcia, and now there's one more guy there that.
Well, I'm excited about Garcia, but I also just don't think they have a closer. And I wrote about this, and I still believe it. I don't think Chris Martin is a closer. I don't think Garcia is a closer, at least not in the way that we normally think of it. I mean, it's likely that Chris Martin is going to have slightly above average fastball velo next year. That's weird for a closer. And Garcia, as good as he is only going to have slightly above average velo for a closer. So they've got 2 guys that are kind of like funky closers, that are closers because they have command or because they have good secondary pitches. That's just weird. Most of the league has one guy that has a fastball you can't hit, and that's the guy who kind of trends towards the closing role. I'm a little surprised that Chris Martin I thought Carlos Estevez would have made more sense for them, because he's more of a closer type.
I think he'd give us the clarity we're looking for. I think Jeff Hoffman fits there. I think you could say Tanner Scott fits there.
But they may not add more, which it may just be posturing for any of their interactions with free agents.
Yeah, it seems like a handful of teams are waiting out those higher priced relievers on the market right now. And maybe once one goes, we'll finally see some movement right after that. They'll all kind of go within a matter of a few days.
Let me look at the projection real quick for Garcia versus Martin, just to get an idea here.
And Martin's going to be 39 in June.
I know, yeah, it's a part of it too. Oh, come on. Just do it. Robert Garcia. There he is. 3.51 ERA with a 26% strikeout rate. I mean, that's decent. It's 124th best in terms of veterans and their projections. Chris Martin, 347 with the 248, 24.8% strikeout rate. So they're basically the same guy. If you want other relievers around them, Mark Leiter Jr., Tyler Holton, Caleb Ferguson.
These are good relievers, but they're not guys that we're usually looking at for saves.
That's what I'm saying. That's exactly what I'm saying. That is exactly what I'm saying. Alex Lange is here. So it's like, I don't know. They're good relievers. And maybe they just like, well, we just want good relievers and we don't want to spend a bunch of money there.
I'm glad Tyler Holton came up though, because I noticed he was inside the top 20 in 5x5 value in the Fangraphs player rater for last year, because he had 8 saves and 7 wins, a 2.19 ERA, a .78 WHIP, and that was over 94 in a third innings. It was one of the more bizarre seasons. Like, so few people in fantasy were able to pull anything close to the full value of that season onto their teams.
Nobody used any of it.
But his second year in a row, he's had this heavy workload with great ratios. It's just in 2023, it was 3 wins and 1 save. And it's like, well, reliever wins, obviously very hard to rely on.
Weird. It's not velo based. It's not strikeout rate based. It's hard to project. Even the Stuff Plus projections say 351. The Steamer says 355 for ERA for Tyler Holton. And you just don't like, can a guy keep doing this?
He's done it so far.
Like,
two heavy
workload
season. Yeah, right. It's more a question of will he break, or I don't think the league's going to figure it out.
Pathway too, you know.
Yeah, just so much. It seems like so much weak contact, and it's amazing to see what he's been able to do. Ahmed Rosario signs with the Nationals. I think this is just deep league at this point. It's not really a guy that you're going to see take an everyday role, right? It's just like a super utility sort of play.
No, but I do think it does have implications for regular leagues, and it's one that annoys me.
Does it chip away at Luis Garcia enough where you think Garcia falls into like a Gavin Lux playing time problem potentially?
Just worried that Luis Garcia loses time against lefties. So far for his career versus righties, Luis Garcia has a 277, 313, 428 slugging, and he's above league average offensively. Against lefties, it's 250, 269 OBP, 356 slugging, and a 68 WRC plus. So he's 32% worse than league average against lefties so far. Of course, that comes in 445 plate appearances, but that's not zero. That's not a tiny sample. That's more than a full season of work against lefties, and he's been bad. So as they make a march towards contention or being a good team, and to begin the season, they may say, they may be sniffing their own glue and say, we're good. So Rosario's gonna combine with Garcia at second, and you're gonna see a platoon there. I don't think this is a team that's gonna start the season and be like, we're not gonna be competitive this year, and we just want to see what we can get out of Luis Garcia Jr. I mean, even though he's 24, he has 1,773 plate appearances into his career. Like, this is, I think, a reason to dock Luis Garcia, down to maybe 550 plate appearances for the season.
I think the only counter argument I have right now is that atop the depth chart at first, second, third, and shortstop, the Nats have a lefty at every single spot. And Rosario can probably play all 4 infield spots as needed. So while I don't think they'd want to make CJ Abrams a big side platoon guy as their shortstop, I don't think they would do that this year. So he's probably safe. Between Tena and Garcia and even Nathaniel Lowe, those are all paths. Like they could still.
It might be most needed against Tena. If you think about it, like an overall projection for Tena for a 91 WRC plus means that your implied projection against lefties is like a 70 or something, a 75,
Right.
So, Rosario might be more needed over there, but Garcia's actual work against lefties was below 75. So anyway, I do think there's some playing time risk for Luis Garcia Jr. that some people may not be acknowledging.
Other flyby notes, Michael Lorenzen has re-upped with the Royals. We have Martin Perez signing with the White Sox to just give them someone every 5th day, a veteran, the credible veteran. TM. Griffin Jax staying in the bullpen, according to the Twins. So we're not getting the Griffin Jax gets a chance to start, at least not right now. So that's a little bit disappointing, but adjust your plans accordingly. And Sam Huff, claimed by the Giants. I think you appropriately pointed out, like, didn't they lose a guy like this on waivers not that long ago?
Yeah, a guy who frames decently well, hits the ball hard, but can't make contact. Could be Joey Bart. Maybe they'll just get their Joey Bart back. I think it also pointed to me. Somebody said, well, doesn't this mean to you that this type of player is readily available on waivers? And I think that's a good point. Bart has improved his strikeout rate, but who knows if that's something that's going to be super sticky. If he returns back to his projected strikeout rate or his career strikeout rate, Joey Bart, he may lose his playing time. And Pittsburgh has multiple options at catcher in Endy Rodriguez and Henry Davis. So I think that Joey Bart is a little bit of a risky second catcher in leagues where he's been taking. That's what I think about Sam Huff.
I think Sam Huff's a more intriguing backup catcher than Tom Murphy at this stage of their respective careers. And I think the only way we're going to see a lot of Sam Huff is if Patrick Bailey has more injury trouble. And I think for a guy that's had multiple stints on the concussion IL, like, that's a valid thing to be worried about. But I think Patrick Bailey is a phenomenal catcher. So I think he's one of those high volume guys
that came back from his injury last year.
Right. So I think this is just a replacement in the backup spot, not necessarily someone that's going to play a ton, but people were excited about Sam Huff once upon a time when he was trying to work his way up the depth chart in Texas. Just a follow-up note, Braxton Garrett is actually going to miss the 2025 season. He had a UCL revision with an internal brace procedure in December. So one potential starting candidate for the Marlins, not going to be available all season.
Are preparing to be very bad. I think, I've seen some people, float the idea that the Marlins may lose more games than the White Sox. One person even floated that the Marlins may lose more games than the White Sox did last year.
Ooh, wow.
Which would say a lot. Although I will say that I actually like what the Marlins are doing in terms of collecting easy to acquire players that are close to the major leagues and project well and are basically like quad A sluggers. Griffin Conine, Kyle Stowers, Connor Normie, but even picking up Matt Mervis, Jonah Bride, David de los Santos, like, they're picking up guys. They're picking up guys that I find much more interesting than the guys the White Sox picked up.
I think that's
just saw
where
Braden Shoemake get released by the White Sox, which we saw coming from a mile away, and they traded for him. So the Marlins are picking up more interesting guys, and you may see. I'm not sure that I would draft a lot of these. Jesus Sanchez and Xavier Edwards are draftable. Connor Norby to some extent. I think over the course of the season, though, we're going to be talking about these guys as waiver pickups. There's going to be somebody who emerges out of the Stowers, Conine, Mervis group that we like.
Right. I could see this being a fair sort of toss-up, which roster wins fewer games in 2025, Marlins or White Sox. Maybe we'll have to do that on the team preview section once we get down to that part of the calendar.
Coming back. How many innings do you think you'll give Alcantara?
Like 140, 150. Like, that's probably where they'd cap him.
They're giving him 178 on Fangraphs.
Are you giving him that many?
No, I don't think so. I mean, it's tempting because he used to be such a workhorse, but
okay. This is perfect. There's actually a mailbag question about this. We have an email from Aaron who wants to know, are there rules of thumb to differentiate year-over-year innings growth for pitchers based on the type of setback they had in the year prior? A couple examples in the email: Shane Boz and Brian Wu. Boz projected for 157 innings from Fangraphs. Seems super aggressive considering he managed 118 and 2/3 last year and didn't pitch in 2023. And then with Wu, he's being projected for 144 on Fangraphs after finishing with 135 across 3 levels, including 131 and 2/3 innings back in 2023. So you've got back-to-back seasons with a workload very similar to what he's being projected for. And then you got a pretty big gap for Boz, like where you have to make a little bit of a leap to get there. So these are all different situations. And I think Wu and Boz being a little bit younger than Sandy Alcantara makes that tricky, because Alcantara, the rule I use, and this is not necessarily what teams are doing, but this is how my brain works, is I look back at what you've done previously and set that as like the ultimate ceiling North Star. This is possible. This has happened before, therefore it is possible. And if that's not a max workload, then I can add something to that and say, okay, you've reached 150 before, 175, 180. The old stupid Verducci effect bump, even though it's been debunked and we've said for years that it's not a thing, it's still the way teams tend to be, is adding a little more, add 10%, add 15%. That's sort of a general thing that's out there, right? Well, Sandy's tough because he's got 4 seasons where he's gone over 180 innings. And then, of course, 2020 sandwiched in there where nobody could have thrown that many innings. So do they just say, you're a veteran pitcher who's thrown the equivalent of like almost 1,000 innings over the last 5 years you were healthy, so why would we hold you back? Or do they say, we want you to not break again, and you're now in that 140, 150 bucket? Because this is a case where I'm actually not as optimistic, just because I think they want to make sure they don't break him again. And part of that, I think, is that they probably want to show the league, if he's back, the guy that they saw pre-injury. They'd rather on a per start, per inning basis, get him back to where he was than max out his workload because of how bad they are right now. So I think their intentions as a club might be to trade him. And in order to trade him, they have to not break him a second time.
Yeah, and then I think that the how good the team is factors in. Tarek Skubal last year, 192 innings. Off a previous max of 149.1.
Yeah.
He was winning the Cy Young, and the team was going to the playoffs, and I didn't even include postseason. So, he's actually he did another 20 innings. So he's, over 200. Another person that I thought was interesting, I looked up to Tanner Houck, 178 innings last year off of a previous high of 119 in 2018.
And he had role shifts multiple times, I think, that have kept his season workloads from exploding in the big leagues in the years prior, right?
Yeah, but injury concerns. But the Boston was decent, going into it. What I'm saying is I think that teams are leaving these old rules behind. Bryce Miller, 180 innings off of 133 peak in 2022, 131 in 2023. They don't care about that sort of a big increase. I'm just like going through the list here of the top innings guys. Bailey Ober, 178 off of 144. That's not as
normal.
Aggressive, but it used to be, add 15% was an idea. They're past that. Who's another guy that Michael King, obviously, he's relevant. His career high was 104, but he had a 149 in the minors.
Yes, that matters.
Yeah.
I would argue that matters. I think even if it was 3 or 4 years ago, 5 years ago, if you've done it for a full season before, I think teams are willing to push you back to that level. I think that's part of what they think
Boz,
of.
Then Boz must have had a minor league season where he had a little bit more. He
did not.
78.2 is the most.
And then last year, if you combine the AAA with the big leagues, you're at like 118 and 2/3, I think, if I'm doing the math correctly. So I think that's where like the 140, 150, and they look like a team that could be vying for a playoff spot at the end of the season. They could push him more because he'll probably be pretty important to them in October if they're going to be a team that does damage. So I think that's where the team context definitely could take your initial expectation, and then 4.5 months go by and you go, okay, this workload's going to go up. We could push a little more on there because of where they're going to be at the end of the year. And so far he's been healthy and effective, so they're not going to taper that off.
Yeah. I think that what I'm saying is just that like they seem to figure this out on the fly a little bit. And there's like how good do we think this player is has something to do with it. Like Zach Littell just blew past anything he'd ever done before. He had a 129. I see, had a 157 in 2017. That's 7 years ago. his, in the meantime, his max was a 129 in 2018, and then he's been a reliever. I guess they said 156, but I think to some extent they're also like, well, he's a free agent in 2026. How good is he actually? He's kind of a 29-year-old journeyman, like, I guess cynically, how much do we care if he breaks?
Well, that might be part of the
Boz is like, oh, this is supposed to be our next ace.
Yeah, that might be part of it. Like where you are in your career, how willing is your team to be to push you? I think Littell had 2 very high volume seasons as a starter early in his career. That opened the door for it. Think about even Ronaldo Lopez. When we were trying to forecast the innings for Ronaldo Lopez, he hadn't been a regular starter, I think, since 2019, at least in terms of getting a full workload. He had back-to-back years over 180 innings. He had arm trouble last year, still got to 135 and 2/3. I probably would have said 140, 150 at the high end, even though he'd done 180 before just because it had been so long. But that's still not that far away from the maximum workloads you're projecting for anyone. It's less, but it's not that much less.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the other thing, like, just generally, I went on MLB Now with Brian Kenny, and I don't think I did a great job. If anybody sees that
confession,
I feel like I could have done better. But
what happened?
Well, we were arguing about Jacob deGrom, and I was like, 130 innings from Jacob deGrom, that's like 130 innings of a closer. And he said, well, first of all, that's not that many innings, and second of all, will he get to 130 innings? I was like, well, fresh ligament, but also, I should have said like 130 innings is a lot now.
Yeah, Grizzly Adams did have a beard, Brian. Like that's 130 innings last year. How many pitchers got to 130 or more innings last year? How many did it?
65.
96.
Okay.
96.
But that's not actually that many if you think about it. That's 3 per team.
Yeah, 3 per team. And of that group, I mean, geez, almost 20 of them were under 150. So it's not like they were there weren't a whole bunch of guys going way over.
Yeah. I think early in my drafts, I want to have an A health grade and a guy that I think can make 180 innings. I want to have like 2 of those guys. In my latest draft, I took Corbin Burns and Logan Webb as my first 2 guys. I just feel like, hey, good. That's like 350 innings at least, I think. Of good stuff. And then after that, my expectation drops to 150.
Fair.
And I want a guy to make 150 from there on. And then near the end of the draft, can this guy get 120, 110? Like, is this guy going to be in the 5th spot and get skipped a bunch? That might be okay with me, So, it's just it's like, the post Mike Shanahan running back situation. And, it's just SP0, but I think you do need to have a couple studs. You can't go full SP0. I think if your whole team is, 120 inning guys and you're trying to piece it together, I think you'll have a hard time with that.
I would say which strategy would I rather employ? Like all bats early or all pitchers early? I'd actually rather go all bats early. I don't want to do either one of these. They're too extreme because I'm finding that the pitchers that are available after round 20, I can still get myself excited about them. I can find things I like about them. I can't say that as easily about the hitters. I think it's more knowing that the playing time can vary even more for the prospect and young bats that come through. If you're talking about the Christian Campbells and the Roman Anthony, those kinds of guys are like, I'm going to go after these guys.
So we just spent so much time talking about Gavin Lux. Those types, in weekly leagues in particular, you're just like, oh God, there's so many ways this could be just terrible. Like he could be in a half platoon or he could be in a, play around the diamond situation or whatever. And it's just like he could bring good value to the teams. The reason the teams are doing this is because they can mix and match. The Giants, the Tigers, we're putting the guys together. We got Veerling. He's going to play somewhere today, and maybe not tomorrow, and that's great for those teams. It's not great for us. And that's the type of hitter that's available late.
Exactly. To close out Aaron's question, the Woo versus Boz thing, I think the Boz projection is fine. It makes sense to me. The Woo projection, I would say, is light on purpose because he had the hamstring injury, and he had at least once, if not twice, where that forearm was a problem and they had to quick shut him down and they brought him back. So it's like he didn't have the surgery. He didn't have the long stop, get it fixed thing. So I think it's still like this lingering concern, and it's not just the arm. So I do think that's
they're both
why
also
they're cautious.
They both also kind of strike me as slight. You know what I mean? Like breakable. I don't know.
You don't know why.
That's a visceral feeling. When I watch them, I'm like, ooh, like remember like Trevor was trying to be more scientific about it and talk about like hyper movers and stuff.
Yeah, oh yeah, like everything seems tight in their movements. You mean like everything's fully? Yeah, okay, I got you.
And just something about them seems like they could be hurt, and they have been, and they, so they're a little bit injury prone for me. So I don't think either of them is a guy that I would really expect 160 innings from.
Thanks a lot for that question, Aaron. We got one more question to get to today. This came in from Discord. Kuel sent us a message this morning writing, can we discuss more how Blake Snell is totally underrated and the best starting pitcher so far in the 2020s overall, in parentheses, and a little before? Okay. Let's work backwards here. No, actually, let's just go forwards.
Let's start at the beginning.
Totally underrated.
I'll give you that.
Underrated, I think, has been established. I think it's been validated by the contract that Blake Snell just got this time on the open market compared to a year ago. And I think he has shown on a per inning basis that he is one of the best starters in the game. That's where we kind of get to the problem of it's a per inning basis, right? So if you look at something like WAR, we know Fangraphs WAR, volume's really important. Blake Snell is 16th in Fangraphs WAR for this decade. So 2020 up through 2024. So one partial season and 4 full ones.
18th, like right now. It's working ranks. Maybe
yeah.
But
44th.
Right.
Snell's 44th in innings pitched. And I have defended him over the years, and multiple seasons now, saying, look, he's not five and fly. He's not a 90 pitch mess who can't even get through 4. He's not that guy. His workloads on a per start basis
is not terrible.
Yeah, that's not a terrible thing. And on a per start basis, his workloads are fine. The injury problems have been multiple, different body parts, different stuff, but none of them are like the crazy devastating labrum UCL problems.
By
so
the way,
he's been able to weather
pretty
it.
Close to his max. He's one of the closest.
So he's got that, right? So the volume probably keeps him away from being like the best so far of the decade. Because I feel like the best pitcher of the decade has to be not necessarily at the top in terms of workload, but somewhere close. You have to be out there most of the time to win that sort of title. Underrated for sure, but we're talking about a guy that in this same span, he's 3rd in K percentage. He's elite in strikeout rate, and we know he's great at when there are balls in play against them, off the weekly hit. Like hit suppression is a skill that he has. Absolutely. But during this span, in this decade, Blake Snell is 19th in ERA. He's tied for 60th in WHIP, and he's 35th in Sierra. So it's not like he's been unlucky from an ERA perspective either, right? He's very good. He is, I think, a true ace, which is a subjective thing people fight about all the time. But I don't think he's the best pitcher of this decade so far. I don't think he's quite there.
You can make a better case over the last 3 years. Over the last 3 years, he jumps to 12th in WAR and 12th in RA9 WAR. And specifically, ERA is fun. He's 4th in ERA, or 3rd, tied with Tariq Skubal. But 1st is Michael King with 329 innings. 2nd is Max Fried in ERA with 437 innings. 3rd is Tariq Skubal with 390. 4th is Blake Snell with 412. And then 5th is Zach Wheeler, 545 innings. And so I kind of think that, if you gave Snell 130 more innings, would he maintain that 2.82 ERA? Like, you have to value what you're saying, about valuing some form of quantity here. Because if you gave Blake Snell 130 more innings, maybe he would have a higher ERA than Zach Wheeler does with a 301. And you can kind of see this little shelf where it goes from these 280 guys who have like 300 to 400 innings to all the guys who have 500 innings, because the next ones are Wheeler, 301 ERA, 545 innings pitched. Fromber, 575 innings pitched, 306 ERA. Corbin Burns, 590 innings pitched, 308 ERA. So, once you get to 500 innings, that most of those guys are in the low threes. And I think that, the question is, what would happen if you gave Snell the extra 130 innings? Would he maintain this 2.82 ERA, or would he have some clunkers in there that would bring him even with those other guys? So I think it's hard, even in the last 3 years, because of quantity, to kind of make this argument. But even on a per inning basis, if you just focus on per inning, then it's Michael King or Tarek Skubal or Max Fried. Like, there's still some options ahead of Blake Snell. You really have to focus, even if you focus on strikeout rate, Spencer Strider's ahead of Snell. If you focus on K minus BB, you've got Strider, Skubal, Scherzer, Cole, Wheeler ahead of him. So it's hard to actually sort a list, even in the last 3 years where he's been more dominant, to where he's number one on it.
I think the answer to who's the best of the decade so far is one of Wheeler, Corbin Burns, or Garrett Cole.
And I'm going to give it to Wheeler. I don't know if it's like recency bias, but Cole with the last year with the injury, Burns with the step down. I think for me, my ranking would be Wheeler, Burns, Cole.
I think Wheeler's done the most to adjust his arsenal to continue aging the best out of the bunch, even though I don't think Burns and Cole are aging poorly. That's the other part of it. Wheeler's the WAR champ so far of the decade, 24.7 by Fangraphs, 3 more wins above replacement than Burns. And then I think Burns is like 4 wins above Cole right now, with Gossman, Nola, and Webb kind of sandwiched in there as top 5 by WAR. So,
I mean, hey, there's a case to be made that Webb is underrated. I mean, nobody ever brings him up in these, and he just keeps going along.
But then that turns into an argument about how important is it to strike a ton of guys out, because that's where he lags.
Really falls down.
Yeah, but that's not the approach. Doesn't have to be. But we appreciate the question, Kuwel. It's fun to think about it. We're almost halfway through the decade, and I think you could make a case for a lot of guys. And I think Snell has a better case than most people would make for him. I do think that's true. So glad you're able to send that question in. Join the Discord if you want to have some arguments like that. Join the Discord because we got some extra stuff rolling out soon. Our position previews start up on Monday already. It's that time of the year. How did it get here so fast?
It's time to go. I'm in a draft. Let's go.
I'm on the clock right now. Everyone's mad at me. No, I'm not on the clock. I'm in a very slow-moving draft and hold league, which is fine because I'm a slow-moving human at this time in my life. So I need things to slow down just a little bit. You can find us on Bluesky. Eno's at enosaris.bsky.social. I'm dvr.bsky.social. Thanks to our producer, Brian Smith, for putting this episode together. That's going to do it for this episode of Rates and Barrels. We are back with you on Monday.
Thanks for listening.